In the silent, velvet vastness, the galaxy spins its endless tales. Of empires built on plasma and prayer, of federations woven from light and law, and of the quiet, forgotten corners where dust and dreams mingle. This story begins in one such corner. A sector known to the star charts as the Velhari Expanse. To the powers that be, it was a backwater. A scrapyard of dead stars and colder ambitions. To the desperate, it was a haven. Here, on the third moon of a gas giant weeping amber storms, was the mining colony of Karvok 7. Home to the Thull. A species of sturdy bipedal reptilians, their hides the color of tarnished copper, their eyes large and luminous, adapted to the dim light of their forge worlds. They were not warriors. They were smiths, engineers, artists in metal and kinetics. And for 12 generations, they had lived under the heel of the Clothy Imperium. The Clothy. Picture a creature of chilling elegance. 4 meters tall, slender as reeds, with skin like polished obsidian and 4 arms that ended not in hands, but in crackling energy manipulators. They did not walk, they glided, a whisper of menace on anti-grav fields. Their technology was psychic in nature, a harmonious and terrifying fusion of mind and machine. They commanded, and the universe obeyed. Their tribute ships came like clockwork, draining Karvok 7 of its rare mineral, stellarium, the lifeblood of Clothy warp cores. Resistance was not punished. It was erased. Silently, cleanly, as if the dissenters had never been. And then, the disturbance arrived. It was not a Clothy vessel. It was a battered asymmetrical hulk of iron and ceramic plating, trailing a cocktail of radioactive isotopes and what the Thull sensors could only classify as archaic fusion exhaust. It blundered into the system on a plume of fire and arrogance, its transponder screaming identifier that made the Thull linguist consoles fritz with static, UEF Marauder, the unsinkable 2. Human. The Thull watched, their hearts sinking. The new species. The upstarts. The talkers. The Galactic Commons spoke of them with amused derision. They had barely cracked FTL a century ago, their ships were brute force reaction drives in an age of gravity stitching, their diplomacy was a chaotic blare of conflicting signals. They were passionate, illogical, fragile. They built monuments out of rubble and called it civilization. The Clothy had assessed them and deemed them irrelevant. A mildly infectious noise on the galactic bandwidth. And now one of their rust buckets had flown into a slaughterhouse. Chieftain Engineer Vortalk watched the human ship settle into a wobbly orbit, its profile blotting out the cold stars. He felt a profound, species-deep pity. "Seal the lower vaults," he rumbled to his aides, his voice a grating bass from years of foundry fumes. "And prepare the morning chimes. The Clothy Overseer will be here within the cycle. These humans have chosen a grave for their curiosity." In the obsidian citadel that overlooked the colony, Overseer Kaelrax of the Clothy observed the new arrival. A flicker of mild irritation crossed his impassive face. A gnat had entered the sanctum. He issued a silent, psychic command. A single needle ship, a sleek dagger of dark metal, detached from the orbital monitor and glided towards the human vessel. The standard procedure: scan, suppress, subjugate. Or, if necessary, scatter into atoms. It had worked 10,000 times before. On the bridge of the unsinkable 2, Captain Elias Vance scratched the salt and pepper stubble on his chin and grinned at the tactical hollow, which was frantically trying to categorize the approaching Clothy ship. "Will you look at that, Lita?" he said, his voice a warm, gravelly baritone. "Fancy little thing. All glide and no guts." Lieutenant Lita Chun, her fingers dancing across a weathered console that beeped and chirruped in protest, didn't look up. "Energy signatures are off the scale. Cap non-Newtonian. Some kind of psychic field manipulation. They're hailing us. It's a direct neural pulse. Trying to force a compliance protocol." Elias's grin didn't fade. "Manners. Put him on speaker. Let's say hello." A sound filled the bridge. Not a voice, but a psychic impression, cold, oily, and absolute, translated poorly by the ship's computer into synthesized speech. "Unidentified vessel. You trespass in Imperium space. Power down your drives. Open your minds for compliance imprinting. Your physical forms will be processed for tribute. Resistance is entropy." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Processed for tribute? That's a new one. Usually, it's surrender or die." This one's got flair. He leaned forward, pressing a button on the comm. This is Captain Elias Vance of the United Earth Federation vessel Unsinkable 2. We're on a survey mission. We mean no trespass. We'd be happy to share a cup of coffee and talk boundaries. The silence that followed was heavier than the void outside. Then, the psychic voice returned, dripping with glacial contempt. Organic noise. You are deemed irrelevant. Your vessel is now forfeit. Do not move. On the hollow, the needle ship extended a crystalline probe. A shimmering, violet beam lanced out, striking the Unsinkable 2's forward hull. Alarm klaxons hooped. Shield dissipation at 40%. Hull polarization failing. Lita reported, her voice tight. They're trying to induce a molecular stasis field. They're going to freeze the ship solid and tow it. Elias Vance's smile finally vanished. His eyes, a faded blue that had seen too many stars, hardened. All right. No coffee then. He straightened his worn flight jacket. Lita. Signal Car Vok 7. Tell them to shield their eyes. And sound the bell. Lita Chen's breath caught. A fierce, wild light ignited in her own eyes. Aye, Captain. Sounding the bell. She typed a code. Not into the standard comms. Into a system isolated from the main grid, housed behind 3 feet of lead-line titanium. A system whose power couplings were as thick as a human torso. Deep within the belly of the Unsinkable 2, in a cavernous chamber that hummed with a bass note felt in the bones, a sequence initiated. Capacitors the size of small buildings began to whine, climbing an octave every second. Magnetic rails, cooled to near absolute zero by dedicated reactors, aligned along a barrel that ran a quarter of the ship's length. The Thull, watching from their colony, saw the human ship go dark. Its running lights died. Its engine plumes sputtered out. They sighed in collective sorrow. The Clothy had subdued it. As expected. Overseer Kaelrax felt a flicker of satisfaction. Order restored. Then, his psychic senses screamed. Rising conflict. The galaxy, for all its wonders, operated on certain assumptions. Energy weapons were the pinnacle, clean, efficient, scalable. Projectile weapons were relics, the tools of primitives and pirates, limited by pathetic chemical explosions and crude kinetics. The very concept of accelerating a solid slug to meaningful combat velocities in space was a joke. The energy required was absurd, the recoil catastrophic, the payload minuscule. Why throw a rock when you could throw lightning? The humans, it seemed, never got the memo. On the bridge of the Unsinkable 2, Captain Vance watched a percentage counter on a solitary green-screened monitor hit 100%. Fire. There was no brilliant lance of plasma. No silent pulse of disintegration. There was only sound. A sound that should not exist in the vacuum. KKKRRRRA-chum. It was the god of thunder striking the anvil of reality. It was the fabric of space itself being torn like canvas. From the prow of the battered human ship, a line of pure compressed fury was born. It was not light. It was something else, a streak of incandescent air superheated to plasma by the mere passage of the projectile, a tunnel of hell punched through reality. It traveled at a significant fraction of c. There was no time to dodge, no shield that could interact with it fast enough. It was Newton's unforgiving law, delivered with apocalyptic prejudice. The Clothy needle ship did not vaporize. It did not explode. It simply ceased to have a coherent structure. The projectile, a 2-meter-long tungsten ferrophosphorus dart, struck it amidships. The kinetic transfer was instantaneous and absolute. The elegant craft disintegrated into an expanding cloud of atomized debris, so fine it sparkled for a moment in the distant star's light before fading into the eternal dark. The recoil was savage. The entire Unsinkable 2, a ship massing thousands of tons, was kicked backward like a tin can, its structural frame groan. In agony. Inertial dampeners screamed, and on the bridge, gravity failed for 3 terrifying seconds before slamming back online. Silence. The kind of silence that is louder than any explosion. On Car Vok 7, every Thull was on the ground. The seismic sensors had spiked. The atmospheric processors had momentarily fluttered. The very moon had vibrated. Vortok picked himself up, his copper hide pale with shock. His large eyes were fixed on the sensor screen, now showing the dissipating debris cloud and the lopsided, seemingly crippled human ship. By the Forge Father's anvil, what did they do? In his citadel, Overseer Kaelrax experienced something entirely new, psychic feedback pain, and something far more alien, confusion. The elegant, silent certainty of his universe had just been violated by a cacophony of brute force. His ship, a manifestation of clothy technological supremacy, was gone. Not defeated. Erased. By a primitive. The psychic shockwave from the obliteration of his crew's minds hit him like a physical blow. He staggered, his forearms trembling. How? The thought was a silent, furious scream across the psychic link to his fleet. Scan that vessel. Find its weapon. It must be a prototype, a stolen artifact. 3 more clothy vessels, a larger harvester and 2 more needle ships moved in. They did not glide this time, they darted, weaving unpredictable patterns, their psychic shields flaring to full intensity, creating shimmering auras of distorted space around them. On the unsinkable 2, alarms were blaring. Structural integrity at 65%. Primary reactor offline. Railgun capacitor banks depleted. Recharge cycle, 12 minutes. Lita shouted over the din, her hands flying across consoles, routing emergency power. Elias Vance was strapped into his command chair, a cut on his forehead dripping blood he ignored. Evasive pattern Zeta. Deploy countermeasures. The fancy ones. Chaff and flares against psychic targeting? Lita asked, even as she executed the order. Won't fool em for long, but it'll piss em off. Elias barked, a reckless laugh in his voice. Clouds of old-fashioned metallic chaff and brilliant magnesium flares burst around the human ship. To the Clothy's exquisitely tuned psychic sensors, it was like a sudden burst of screaming static and blinding light. For a few precious seconds, they were confused, their targeting solutions fouled. The larger harvester ship, recovering first, unleashed a volley of psychic lances, coherent beams of telekinetic force meant to crush a ship's hull like a tin can. One grazed the unsinkable 2 starboard side, shearing off sensor arrays and leaving a deep glowing dent in the armor. They're adapting. Lita called out. Time on the bell. Elias asked, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. 9 minutes, 40 seconds. Too long. Elias's mind raced. He saw the Thull colony on the surface, defenseless. He saw the Clothy fleet, now fully alerted, a swarm of obsidian daggers against his one battered ship. The arrogance of his initial shot was gone, replaced by the cold calculus of a captain responsible for his crew and now, inadvertently, for an entire people below. Open a channel to the colony. All frequencies. Audio only. Human response. In the heart of Karvok 7, amidst the roaring forges and trembling vents, Chieftain Vortok heard a new voice. It was not the silent, imposing whisper of the Clothy. It was rich, textured, strained with static and effort, but undeniably alive. Thull of Karvok 7. This is Captain Elias Vance of the UEF. Sorry for the noise. We seem to have stirred up the hornet's nest. Listen carefully. We can draw their fire for a few more minutes, but they will turn on you after they're done with us. You have to get to cover. Deep cover. And, we need a firing solution. Vortok, his engineer's mind reeling, grabbed the calm human. You are doomed. And you have doomed us. Your weapon is immense, but it is one. They are many. What firing solution can we possibly provide? Your deep-core seismic maps, Vance's voice crackled, a note of urgent respect in it. You mine stellarium. You must map the mantle, the fault lines. Send us the data for the region directly beneath the Clothy citadel. Understanding dawned on Vortok, and with it, a terror so profound it froze his blood. You cannot. The tectonic instability. You could shatter the crust. You would kill us all. We can calculate the yield. A new voice came on, younger, sharper, Lita Chun. Your maps are more advanced than our stellar cartography. We need the harmonic resonance points. The weakest nodal junctions. We have one shot left with our main weapon. We need to make it count not just against a ship, but against their foundation. It was madness. It was a gamble with extinction. But as Vortok looked at the terrified faces of his brood, At the looming shadow of the clothy citadel, a monument to 12 generations of subjugation, he saw the human choice. They could have run. Their weapon, even depleted, could have punched a hole for them to flee. Instead, they were trying to protect his people. They were fighting a fleet with a single gun, and their first thought was for the collateral damage. He made a decision that would be sung of in Thul sagas for millennia. Transmitting data now, human Vance. May your aim be true, and your math be sound. On the bridge, the data streamed in. Lita's hands became a blur, integrating the complex geological surveys with their damaged targeting computer. I've got it, a confluence of 3 major fault lines, 2 kilometers below the Citadel's foundation. Hit that, the seismic shockwave will be channeled, directed upward. But Cap, the energy required to penetrate that deep, even with their foundation's structural weakness, it will be a maximum yield shot. Recoil will be catastrophic for us. We might break the ship in half. Elias Vance looked at the tactical display, at the 3 clothy ships closing in for the kill, their weapons glowing with charged malice. He looked at the image of Kar Vok 7, a fragile jewel of industry against the dark moon. He thought of Earth, so far away, with all its noisy, chaotic, beautiful stubbornness. We didn't come all this way to be good neighbors, Lita, he said, his voice suddenly quiet, calm. We came to be human. Load the last penetrator. The big one. Set coordinates for the nodal junction. And when I give the word, you ring that bell like it's the last damn day of the world. Climax. The clothy fleet converged. They had analyzed the primitive weapon. A kinetic projector of monstrous power, but slow to recharge, clumsy, with devastating recoil. A dinosaur of a thing. They would swarm it, overwhelm it with precise psychic strikes at its engines and power cores. Overseer Kaelrax, his initial shock now curdled into cold, furious rage, directed the assault personally. He would dissect this human insect and learn its secrets before erasing its memory from the cosmos. The unsinkable 2 was dying. Fires raged in 2 compartments. Atmosphere vented from a dozen rents in its hide. It listed, a wounded beast, its evasive maneuvers growing slower, more desperate. Your defiance is a pointless spasm, Kaelrax's voice pierced the psychic ether, aimed directly at Vance's mind. You have shown a curio. Now you will show oblivion. Your ship will be a monument to the futility of force. On the bridge, Elias Vance ignored the voice in his head, the pounding headache, the smell of ozone and burning wiring. He watched Lita's screen. The percentage counter climbed. 70%. 80%. The ship shuddered as another psychic lance tore through a non-essential section. They're focusing fire on our engine nacelles, Lita reported, her face smudged with soot, her voice hoarse. Let him, Elias murmured, his eyes on the targeting hollow, which now overlaid the geological map of the moon. A deep, red crosshair pulsed over a point of incredible subterranean tension. Just a little closer. Come on, you shiny bastards. Line up for the picture. The 3 clothy ships, confident, moved into a classic pincer formation. The harvester in the center, the needle ships flanking high and low. Perfect. Capacitors at 98%, Lita said, her finger hovering over the final authorization key. Structural integrity won't take the recoil. We're going to lose the forward section. Life support in the aft will. I know, Elias said, his voice gentle. He unstrapped himself and placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a hell of a ride, Lieutenant. She looked up, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her cheeks, but she was smiling. The hell of it, sir. Fire. Lita Chen slammed her palm down on the key. This time, the sound was different. It was deeper, fuller, as if the universe itself had taken a final decisive breath and then screamed. KKKRRRRA, BOM. The projectile that left the railgun was different. It was not a dart. It was a spear. A 20-ton, stabilized, gravimetrically focused penetrator, designed for one thing, to ignore everything between it and its target and deliver its entire kinetic payload into the smallest possible point. The light was blinding. Even with filters, the Thul on the surface saw a second terrible star ignite in their sky, a line of sunfire connecting the stumbling human ship to their moon. The penetrator hit not the citadel, but the barren plain 300 meters from its base. It struck the ground and did not explode. It plunged. It tore through regolith, rock and dense mantle, a meteor in reverse, its path a tunnel of vaporized stone. It reached the designated depth, the nodal junction of titanic geological stresses. And there its kinetic energy, the sum total of a small star's worth of capacitor banks, the arrogance of human engineering, and the desperate hope of two species, was released. It was not an explosion. It was a convulsion. The ground beneath the clothy citadel did not simply shake. It leapt. A column of solid rock, superheated to plasma, erupted from the point of impact, but the true damage was invisible. The seismic shockwave, focused and channeled by the precise fault lines, traveled upward like a fist made of a continent. The citadel, a marvel of psychic architecture, was lifted whole into the air, 10-20 meters, and then dropped as the ground beneath it turned to liquid stone. It collapsed in on itself, vanishing into a suddenly gaping maw of fire and liquefied rock. The effect on the clothy ships was psychological annihilation. The psychic shock of their overseer's death, the violent, brutal geological nature of the attack, the sheer, unimaginable scale of the force unleashed, it short-circuited their collective consciousness. Their ships faltered, their shields flickered and died. They weren't defeated by a superior technology, they were traumatized by a force of nature they could not comprehend. The recoil was everything Lita feared. The forward third of the unsinkable II, containing the railgun and its massive support structure, shattered. It broke clean off in a storm of tearing metal and freezing atmosphere. The remaining aft section, containing the bridge and engines, spun away, tumbling end over end into the void, a dead thing. Resolution. Silence returned to the Velhari expanse. The clothy fleet, leaderless and spiritually broken, withdrew into warp space, their sleek forms fleeing the scene of their incomprehension. Below, the Thull emerged from their deepest bunkers into a changed world. The oppressive obsidian spire was gone, replaced by a smoking, glowing wound in the moon's flesh. The air crackled with static and the smell of ozone and powdered stone. And tumbling in a decaying orbit was the wreck of the human ship. It took the Thull 3 days to reach it with their salvage tugs. They cut through the mangled hull with reverence, expecting to find a tomb. What they found in an airtight emergency shelter near the shattered bridge was Captain Elias Vance and Lieutenant Lita Chun, unconscious but alive in their survival pods, life signs weak but stubbornly persistent. They were brought to the surface, to the Hall of the Forge Father, and treated with every medical technique the Thull possessed. When Vance awoke, his body aching in places he didn't know he had, he found Chieftain Vortok standing by his bed, his large eyes wide with an emotion the human had never seen directed at his kind, awe, tinged with something like fear. You broke the moon to save us," Vortok rumbled, his voice trembling. "You broke your own ship. You knew you would die." Elias coughed, wincing. Seemed like the thing to do at the time. Why? The question was not one of curiosity, but of desperate need to understand a new fundamental law of the universe. Elias thought for a long moment, looking at the sturdy, honest face of the Thull engineer. They told you to open your minds. To be processed. They didn't ask. They didn't argue. They just decreed. He shifted, meeting Vortok's gaze. We humans, we're terrible at taking decrees. We talk back. We throw tea into harbors. We draw lines in the sand and dare the tide to cross them. Sometimes we have to build a really big hammer. To make our point. But the cost, Vortok gestured vaguely upward, towards the sky where the debris field glittered. The cost of kneeling is higher, Lidachin said from the adjacent bed, her eyes open now, clear and sharp. It's paid every day in silence forever. Our cost was one ship. One shot. A bill we chose to pay. News traveled, as it always does, on subspace whispers and traders' tales. The story of the clothy defeat was too bizarre, too visceral, to be suppressed. Details were sketchy. A human vessel. A primitive kinetic weapon. A moon scarred. An overseer and his citadel, swallowed by the planet itself. The galactic commons buzzed with theories, dismissals, then mounting, incredulous verification. Diplomatic channels to Earth, once quiet and condescending, lit up with urgent queries. Military analysts from a dozen species pored over the scant sensor data, their equations failing, their tactical paradigms crumbling. They called it the Karvok anomaly. The humans, with their characteristic lack of poetry, called it the shot heard round the galaxy. A year later, A Thul delegation stood on a podium in the vast rotunda of the Galactic Commons. With them stood a human in a simple UEF dress uniform, walking with a slight limp, his chest bearing a new strange medal, a stylized bell over a cracked moon. Captain Elias Vance was there as a witness. Chieftain Vortok addressed the assembled species, his voice transmitted across 1,000 worlds. He spoke of tyranny. He spoke of a choice made in the dark. And he spoke of the humans. Not as gods, not as demons, but as something perhaps more frightening. They do not wield the silent will of the Clothy, he boomed, his image projected giant before the silent assembly. They do not dance with light like the seraphim. They have not mastered the molecular song like the hive of Kes. They have only force. But not the force of energy. The force of idea. The idea that a line, once drawn, must be defended. If this story of a single shot that reshaped the stars moved you, subscribe for more tales of humanity's defiant roar in the silent dark. More human stories from the stars await.